The California one, that's the one that's like sort of the most eye-popping recommendation that you make, which is make California into 6 states. And there'd be 58 states in America now. We'd have to make room on the flag. You know, I'm already, that would be the main objection to this. The Republicans being like, do you really want to change our flag? But
I just got this from Home Depot.
But why? But what about California is so unique in that, like, it really cries out for this, because like it really is ridiculous. California is so big; it's the 5th largest economy in the world. It is,
folks. When California sits around the Electoral College, it sits around the Electoral College.
It's one of the most blue leaning states, but yet it has 2 senators. What describe your plan to make 6 or 7 states out of California?
Yeah, so it would be 7 total. So
okay, 7 states. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a unique situation in that, like, California is the largest state in the union. It's also one of the most, at this point, the most sort of left-wing states in the country. So Hillary Clinton won that state by 30 points. She won Orange County, which no Democrat had won since FDR. So it's like there's been this long-term transformation of California from a contested state into this like deep, deep Democratic stronghold. And because so much of the progressive energy in this country is in California, a lot of it ends up getting bottled up in the 2 senators from California. California clearly does not have the same kind of structural power in American national politics that like Wyoming does, right? And it's just a problem. Like, and if you look at the Senate, even DC and Puerto Rico only get us part of the way there to parity in the Senate. Like, there's probably 30 or 31 Republican-leaning states, 19 or 20 Democratic-leaning states. So that in a neutral environment, we're going to lose the Senate more often than we win it, and that's a problem because that means public policy is going to get pulled like inexorably to the right, like cycle after cycle after cycle. If we lose 2 out of every 3 elections or 3 out of every 4, it's a problem. And so. But the equal representation in the Senate is like, it's written into the Constitution with a special provision that you can't deprive, even if we wanted to amend the Constitution to make the Senate, equal, we can't do it because we have to have the consent of the states who are being deprived of equal representation. So it's just like a non-starter, right? Like the Constitution is like, it's like a noose on this question. And so we have to get creative about workarounds. And I think there's both, there's like a logistical case for breaking California up, and there's a partisan case for it. I drew a bunch of maps in the book that would have created 7 states that voted for Hillary Clinton. All 7 of those states would still have access to the Pacific Ocean. I think they'd all be economically viable. And I think there's a case to be made to the people of California also. That I think that the federalism in this country was designed to give people access to a government that's closer to them than the national government. Particularly in the case of California, which is like a million miles away from DC. And it's so huge. I think that there is a lot of frustration, like in California, about state politics, about the remoteness of Sacramento. And so again, it's a kind of thing where I'm like, I actually think this would be a good idea to break up California. But it's also partisan hardball. I think you can't count on all 14 of those senators being Democrats all the time. But I think like between 10 and 14, like 10 would be the low point.
Well, you mentioned that
delegation.
You do say that, in the past, if you had pursued this same plan, it would be almost guaranteed that you'd create a bunch of Republican-leaning states, because there is a lot of California that is extremely conservative. You basically, the way you draw the lines is that you're basically making states out of like the 7 major cities in California and the areas surrounding them. And it's sort of, you'd have to be very careful about how you draw these lines, right? I mean, like, wouldn't this require sort of a kind of gerrymandering?
Yeah, I mean, it is gerrymandering in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, but again, it's like if you think about like the predicament of the planet, like the predicament of Democrats nationally, or the left nationally more broadly, I really think it justifies something like this because, again, it's not unconstitutional. Like there's a procedure in the Constitution for creating states out of existing states. You need an act of the state legislature, and then you need an act of Congress. I think also, in this case, you obviously need the consent of the people of California. Like, I don't recommend just like doing this over their heads if they don't want it. Like, you need a ballot initiative, and it needs to be endorsed. But
you also say because of California has this weird quirk with their referendum system, where any referendum can be put up for a vote. Like that would be the sort of the end to this, is get that on the ballot. Hey, do we want to create 7 states out of California? And they would actually, the Californians would have to vote on that. But I mean, they
Right.
voted for Arnold Schwarzenegger to be their governor. So
If I recall correctly, I'd have to look this up after the show, but there is an initiative on the ballot bankrolled by an eccentric billionaire to split California into 3 states, but it's polling very poorly, like 4-1 against.
Yeah, I mean, it's you know, I like to divide the ideas in this book into 2 camps. You know, there's like low hanging fruit that I think could be accomplished in month 1, and then there's stuff that's like an ideological project that we'd have to pursue over the course of a number of years.
Yeah,
I think Southern California falls into this second camp of like, I obviously don't think this can happen in the first year. It's more like an attempt to open up a conversation about the idea of dividing California in some way, shape, or form to benefit the different Democratic Party. I think like DC and Puerto Rico, that's month 1. California, we should not count on that happening. I think even maybe in somebody's first term.
there could be, I'm thinking it through. There could be an incentive for state legislators to support this, thinking, oh, all of these new federal seats are open now, and governorships.
I mean, like if you're in the California State House, like suddenly you look in the mirror and you see like governor of Sacramento, like governor of San Diego. Suddenly you're a presidential contender because you're a governor instead of a state legislator.
Yeah.
You've got, like, instead of Feinstein having to run against 6 other people, they could all be senators, So
everybody wins.
Yeah, everybody gets a Senate seat. So yeah, I mean, even from a self-interest perspective, I could see people in the California state government, like really, really getting down with this. I think the real problem is people in California, when I tell them this idea, I get this look like, you're out of your mind, and you're from Illinois, so like, why are you trying to tell me what to do with my state?
Well, I mean, like the other thing would be like every one of these new states created out of California would each have more people in it than almost every other state in America.
Yeah, exactly. They'd all still be quite large. Yeah.
Yeah, no, they'd be huge states. Now, you mentioned like a possible retaliation should the California plan ever become a reality would be to the Republicans to do the same and break Texas up into a bunch of different states, hoping to get the same share of their newly formed Senate seats. But you say that like that would be a little bit more of an iffy proposition for Republicans. It would be a little bit more dangerous or harder to predict for them, that like to guarantee that they would get like, I don't know, a dozen new Republican senators.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of problems with it. I mean, one is that Texas, Texas is trending in the opposite direction from California. California is becoming bluer every day, whereas Texas is trending purple. And so I think that the breaking up Texas really has the potential to backfire on Republicans because of the demographic changes that are underway in the state of Texas. I don't think it's a swing state in the next decade, but I think it's moving in that direction. And if you wanted to break Texas up into 5 pieces, unless you want to stick like Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, and Houston into the same state and have a bunch of like bankrupt, like rural hellholes, like you can't do it without creating a couple of Democratic states in its wake. So I think at most they could draw the lines and get a couple of extra Republican senators out of it.
Also, all of their belt buckles would be worthless.
Yeah, they'd have to print, the snake flag would have to be redone. It's an iffy proposition. There's also a really strong sense of identity in Texas that I think this would not go over well anyway.
Don't mess
more so
with
than California.
Don't mess with Texases.